Jay Eggleston. I'm the state representative for everyone who lives in Davies, DeKalb, Gentry, and Harrison counties. That is District 2. I've had the honor to serve that area. This is going on my 7th year now. I'm in my final term, and it is an honor to be here. I grew up in DeKalb County around Fairport, if any of you know where Fairport is, just north of Maysville. Worked the farm with Dad. My mom was a school teacher for nearly 30 years. I've done a little substitute teaching. Had a business here in Cameron that I still own as a home-based business for, what is it now, 25, 26 years. And then for the last almost 7 years, state representative. So I'll kind of give you a little legislative update on some of the bills that may interest you. This year, the House, I'm not even talking about the Senate, just the House, filed 1,538 bills. You'll be happy to know I'm not going to spend the next 8 hours.
Thank you.
But a little refresher on how it works. When a legislator files a bill, the Speaker of the House has to like it enough to send it to a committee that deals with that topic. The committee has to like it enough to pass it out. There's a second intermediate committee called the Rules Committee that has to like it enough to move it on, and then the whole House would then vote on it if it's brought up on the floor for debate. That's up to the floor leader whether they bring it up or not. Once it's out of the House, that whole process starts over in the Senate. So out of the 1,500 or so bills filed, so far about 402 have made it out of committee, the committee they were sent to. And of those 402, 59 have so far passed out of the House, and now have moved over to the Senate, and in the second half of the session, they're going to check them out. So I'm going to just cover a handful that I thought might be of interest to you, and then talk a little bit about my role in the House, and then we'll let Randy talk, and then if you guys have questions, be happy to take it. A bill that I think you guys would like, House Bill 701. It has to do with teacher retirement. I'm not an expert on this, so I'm going to read you the summary. The bill repeals the termination date of provision allowing members of the public school retirement system, Missouri, who have 31 or more years of creditable service to have their retirement allowance calculated using a multiplier of 2.55. Currently, any retired teacher can be employed as a position covered by peers without stopping their retirement benefits. Such teacher may earn up to 60% of the minimum teacher salary and will not contribute to the retirement system or earn credible service. This bill will allow such a teacher to earn up to annual earnings limit applicable to Social Security recipient before the calendar year of attainment of full retirement age. And then also currently a retired teacher who is receiving a retirement benefit from the retirement system is allowed to work up to 2 years for a school district covered by the retirement system. If the system has a shortage of certified teachers, this bill would change that to 4 years. So all of that is wrapped into House Bill 701. That passed out of the House by a vote of 153 to 1. It was sponsored by former teachers, so I think you would like that. One that you probably got emails about that you won't like, or at least we're told not to like, House Bill 369, that's on education savings accounts. So the details, the way that it finally got out of the House, which is much different than the way it was filed, students can apply for scholarships from this private fund. Donors into this fund can get 50% of their donation recouped through an income tax credit. The maximum amount of credits allowable are $50 million a year. Eventually, inflation could take that up to no more than $75 million when it's all said and done. The first students who are eligible for these scholarships are those on free and reduced lunch. The poorest students would be eligible for these first. After all of those have been satisfied, the next ones would be those who are double free and reduced lunch. And then if there's any money left over, then it'll be open to everyone else. This is limited to only students who live in the Jackson, Clay, St. Louis, and St. Charles counties, and any city that's at least 30,000 population or greater. So no cities around here. St. Joe would be the closest one that might be, but really this is more of an effort to change things in the big city. The program can enroll students for these scholarships only in years where the transportation funding is increased by $18 million more than what the governor's recommendation was this year. So there have to be an increase in transportation funding, which is what we hear a lot about, before any kid can get enrolled in this particular program. And any year in the future, future, where transportation funding falls below that threshold, no new scholarships can be awarded. Also, any school who might lose a student as a result of this program will get to keep that student's funding as if they were still enrolled for the first 5 years of the program. The program also does not alter the funding formula, doesn't require the formula to not be fully funded, and does not change any of the hold harmless calculations for our smaller schools. Nearly all, I have 17 public schools, most of them fall under that hold harmless. This will not affect that. Moving on into other school things, House Bill 257 talks about Head Start school buses. It basically says that any school bus that calls a Head Start student has to fall under the same qualifications of a regular bus, except they don't need a crossing guard. That passed 157 to 1. House Bill 151 is on superintendent sharing. It will pay a school $30,000 a year for 5 years if they will share a superintendent with an adjacent school. I think this is the second year that this bill has been out there. It passed 156 to 1. So those are most of the school-related bills that have come out. Couple of things that aren't directly school-related. One, it has to do with foster care and adoption. The Speaker of the House this year was a foster child and ended up being adopted, so he has lived through that system and what it's like and understands kind of the hardships. He knows that we want to get kids in good homes, and so House Bills 429 and 430 offers different tax credits and incentives for parents who are willing to foster care, willing to adopt. That's been a big emphasis on a number of the different bills we've had this year. Protection of election integrity. Obviously, we just had the recent presidential election. Folks around the country are worried about the laws regarding elections. So there's a couple of different bills. I'm not going to give you a number because there's several. But in a package, they would institute voter ID. So when you go to vote, you got to show your picture to prove you are who you say you are. No excuse absentee voting would be allowed. Most of the time, if you say you're going to be out of town, the clerk doesn't have to ask you what your excuse is anyway, even though they're supposed to. So, there's really no way to police that, so we'll do away with that. But no mail-in ballots. Everything's going to be paper ballots. No more voting on an iPad if this passes. And then any machine that then counts the ballots, the software in there has to come from an American company, not a foreign company. So that's some of the election integrity. Initiative. Yeah.
Okay. Has that come out of the House? Or
Yes, all of this has come out of the House and into the Senate. I'm not going to tell you about all the things that are still floating because they may go nowhere, but these are things that actually have legs and are moving on. Initiative petition reform. A number of the more high-profile things that you voted on the last several years were initiative petitions. These ideas that come along, they get signatures, they kind of hit you up at the shopping mall, hey, sign this petition, they get it on the ballot. The Clean Missouri Initiative that would have changed redistricting, minimum wage, the medical marijuana stuff, all of that is initiative petition. The general thought about initiative petition is, Fred and Joe are sitting around the coffee shop and one of them said, well, there ought to be a law. Well, you're right, let's write it down, get signatures, get the Secretary of State. It really isn't that much grassroots type of an effort anymore. It's usually groups, and we have found that it's largely out-of-state, your East Coast, West Coast political action type groups that are they have been set up to specifically target Midwestern states with their more coastal ideas to change us. And so we want to still have initiative petition. It's actually about half the states in America don't even have initiative petition. The only way that the Constitution of the law ever gets changed is through the legislature. And the citizens really have no way to do that. But we don't want to get rid of it and become like them, but we do want to kind of address some of these issues to make sure these out-of-state groups aren't gaining our system. So some of the measures are to get more signatures that it takes to get something on the ballot, to get signatures in all 8 congressional districts. Sam Graves is our congressman. Well, there's 8 of those districts throughout the state. Right now, it says you only have to get signatures in 6 of them. So you could totally omit getting any signatures from Sam's district and Jason Smith's district in the southeast. That makes up 60% of the geography of Missouri. Just omit us in getting those signatures. And so this would make sure you're getting some buy-in from all the districts across the state. And then raising the threshold for passage on changing the Constitution from 50% to a 2/3 vote. Also having a little higher fee to get some of these initiative petitions on the ballot. A lot of these groups will actually write their petition up, write the language, but then they'll write like 20 different versions with just slightly different wording, send them all to the Secretary of State, and now the Secretary of State's team has to pore over all of these and decide which one they want. It's a ton of work and man hours and taxpayer money that goes into evaluating these. And so the Secretary of State would like to see that every one of these you send me, you need to send $500, I think is the thing, to make sure that you're not just sending a gobble. You get it right to begin with, not you necessarily, but these interest groups, and send in one. And then the big thing that I have tried to champion, hearings. People, we just don't know what's in these things. A few years ago, I think we had 7 things on the ballot. It was 9 pages of newspaper print to try to pour through all of the details. And in any of our bills, we have to have hearings in the House, hearings in the Senate, a chance to amend and find the flaws and fix them. With stuff that goes on the ballot that will change our very Constitution, there's never any hearings. These special interest groups write them up, they get the signatures, poof, it's right on the ballot, warts and all. And the thing that I have gotten more social media likes and shares on is when I explain this is what this ballot initiative really does. And I post that, people crave that information. So one of the things they put in at my insistence was that these things go through hearings where publicly we can vet them, we can get the sponsors up to explain, where did you get your money? What are you really trying to accomplish here? How's the world going to look if this initiative petition passes? So a lot more transparency. So anyway, that's on the voting stuff. Wayfair, I'm the sponsor of one of the Wayfair bills. For those of you who don't know what Wayfair is, it's basically a sales tax on stuff people buy over the internet. Right now, if you go to a brick and mortar store, you gotta pay sales tax. If you buy that same item over the internet, then maybe you're paying tax, maybe you're not. Some websites collect it, some don't. A lot of our businesses have said that is an unfair playing field. It's hard enough to compete with the Walmarts and now the Amazons of the world anyway. You know, if you add that price differential in there, that makes it a real struggle. Now, the flip side of that is if you level the playing field by charging more taxes on internet purchases, that is technically a tax increase. People are going to have to pay more in taxes to try to help the businesses. So how do we, and we're not really about trying to make people poor just to make government richer. So how do you balance it? How do you help your brick and mortars without hurting the average Joe family? So you offset that with a reduction in income tax. So you're going to pay more on your internet purchases, you're going to have less taken out of your check. In the end, it's a wash to the citizens, it's a wash to government, you help business, and along the way, then, as more people shop locally, that will, over time, help our economy, help our businesses, and government will win at the same time the citizens win. That is the Wayfair bill that's come out of the House. There's also been one that's come out of the Senate. They're not exactly alike, so we're going to have to work with each other to blend them together to get this across the finish line. This is something that's probably a 3-year project in the works now. Because I'm kind of a math numbers guy, I was asked to look into this, and it's really complicated. We have over 1,400 different sales taxing jurisdictions, which is about 1/3 of all of them in America, I'm told, just because of the way our laws work on taxes. There have been 2 court cases, one at the U.S. Supreme Court, one at the Missouri Supreme Court over the years that affect this. So it's a complicated issue, but I think this year we'll have a chance to get that across the finish line. I don't talk a lot about what goes on in the Senate. I get a lot of questions about, hey, what do you think about Senate Bill 123? Well, by the time I ever see it, it's going to be a totally different looking bill, so I don't bother to read a whole lot of that because of how busy I am with stuff in the House as it is. I know that Senate Bill 55 has come on your radar as a major overhaul change. What I do know about it is it did make it out of committee. It made it to the Senate floor. They debated it for a while, but then they kicked it aside. Said, yeah, this isn't ready for prime time. They put it on the back burner. The last time it was brought up was February 23rd. So it's sort of laid there for at least a month as they've moved on to other things. I don't know if it'll move. I'm pretty sure since it's been laid over, it's not going to move in the form that it's in if it does end up moving. And then, of course, once it comes to us, it'll have to go to the committee before it's ever on the House floor. The committee may change it too. And then the other thing you may have heard about is a potential gas tax increase that the Senate has passed. That's Senate Bill 262. Gas tax increases have been on the ballot and been rejected by voters for a variety of reasons. This one would not be an on the ballot. This would be an automatic. It would be a 2.5 cent per gallon increase for 5 years. So for a total of 12.5 cents would be how much the gallon of gas would go up if this passes. This one has a unique wrinkle in that they say it's rebatable, which means that if you keep all of your receipts for every time you buy gas, you can turn them in on your income taxes and get a credit for that extra 12.5 cents a gallon that you paid. The argument is that, see, that Missouri citizens wouldn't have to really pay this because they're going to end up getting it off the income taxes. But all the out-of-state people who drive through and buy gas, well, they don't pay Missouri income tax, so they'd have no way to get a rebate, so they'll be the ones really paying. They did this in South Carolina. I'm told maybe 10% of the citizens in South Carolina actually bother to turn in the rebate. So it does, you know, it depends on how hard you want to keep track of paperwork. But that's the way that the Senate bill is written right now. I have not heard whether that will get any traction on the House side or not, but that has definitely been the news, so I thought I'd mention that too. The last thing, and then I'll turn it over to Randy, my duties. So last term, I had the honor of being the assistant floor leader. My fellow Republican members chose me to be the assistant floor leader for the House. That put me in leadership. I was the only member of leadership from north of I-70, certainly from a rural area, and so I oftentimes had to point things out in leadership meetings about what had to be our priorities that my folks, counterparts in the cities, just, they didn't understand. It wasn't that they didn't care, they just don't live our life and understand how small communities operate different than the big cities do. And that was an honor to do that. This year, I am the chair of the Rules Committee, that middle committee that I told you all the bills go through before they get to the House. There's only 2 Rules Committees. So half of all the bills come through my committee before going on. And I have to be the filter for prioritizing which ones are important and which ones aren't. Now, none of the K through 12 bills go through my rules, they go through the other one. But I've had to read, I think it's close to 200 bills so far. 18 different committees funnel bills to mine. And so I have a lot of reading. In fact, I have to go home and read another dozen or so that came out yesterday and move those on. So that's part of my job. And then I am on, and last year chaired the Ethics Committee. Ethics isn't about bills. It's not about budget. It's about character. It's about making sure that our legislators behave the way that they are supposed to. And anytime that they misbehave in a complaint, last term I was the chair of the Ethics Committee, and I had to do investigations. And we set a little history. In fact, the first thing that Randy ever had to vote on was whether or not to expel one of our members or censure. And I put a little bit in the paper about it, and I'll kind of refresh you. We had a member from St. Louis City, went to a party. There was a young impressionable college intern who also went to that party. He bought her a few drinks. He convinced her to let him go home with her, and he had sex with her. Now, as a person in control and power, that we have rules to strictly forbid any sort of amorous relationship between members and interns, staff, LAs, any of that. You can't do that. I mean, in fact, we have an annual sexual harassment training every year on that. And that member had gone through that just the week before and just didn't care. He not only did that, he further victimized her by coming back to the Capitol the next day and bragged about it. Told his LA, guess what I did last night? His LA, doing the responsible thing, then had to report that. Once he learned that his LA reported it, he began to threaten his LA. And scared her to death. In fact, he got her in an elevator and said, you know, in my neighborhood, people die for doing stuff like that. So I had to lead the investigation to uncover all of this as the chair. I was kind of the police and the prosecuting attorney. The Ethics Committee is the only committee that's an equal number of Republicans and Democrats to make sure there's nothing political about what we do. I wanted to get footage from the bar where they left and found out that that footage had been deleted the day before. So it made it really challenging. It took me about a year, but eventually got enough witness testimony, was able to get a hold of some phone records to prove that this guy really shouldn't be in the house. He's not worthy. Surely in his district, among 37,000 people, they can find somebody. We put up a report. The Ethics Committee signed off on it unanimously. And normally at that point, a member would have the good sense to resign, but he didn't. This particular fellow really has nothing to go back to. I don't think he has any other job at home. In fact, I'm told he doesn't even have a car. He has to bum rides to the Capitol every week. And so he didn't want to quit. And so that put the House in the spot of having to do something called a censure. This is something that had never been done in Missouri's history. We've never publicly censured a member because it never gotten that far. So I had to present the case to all 163 members as to why this fellow should be punished, and everybody had to vote on it. And the vote was overwhelming once it was all said and done. This is the only censure that's ever happened, and I was told as I was preparing this that this would set the precedent for how ethics committees treat these issues in the future. We have to send the message that none of this nonsense is acceptable anymore. You can't use your position of power to victimize people who are under you. And so it was kind of a heavy responsibility. I didn't sleep well for a long time. But with the help of everyone, then we have punished him, not only the public embarrassment, but the terms of the censure. He can never serve on a committee again. He can never have an intern again. He can't supervise his own LA. He can never be in a position of leadership, any sort of power position. And he has to pay back all of the costs that were involved in the investigation, the court reporter costs. Obviously, when he threatened his LA, we had to hire a new LA for him. That's cost. It was like $22,000. So the guy should have resigned, but he didn't, and he's basically ineffective at this point. But the message has been sent that we're not going to tolerate that. We're going to treat not only women, but everybody with respect with what we did. And I didn't really want to have that duty, but I was honored that leadership thought enough of me and my character to put me in that spot. And I'm glad it's done. I'm glad it's over with. I'm glad we got it resolved the way we did. So that's, and I don't chair that committee anymore, but I'm still on that. We have an ongoing investigation now, and we'll do our due diligence on it as well. The vast majority of members that I serve with are wonderful people. That this guy was the exception. Most are former teachers, sell insurance, deputy sheriffs, people who served in the military. Ours is the true citizen legislature, our founding fathers' vision. It is an honor to be a part of it, and we just need to make sure all of us treat it honorably. So, all right. So that's all I have. I'm probably taking too much of your time, but that's kind of a synopsis of what's going on in the first half.
We'll let Randy go and then we'll take questions.
You want questions to me, or you want Randy to speak and then we take
Why
questions?
don't we let Randy speak and then we'll take questions together, because I know Randy has another commitment to a retirement in Kingston. So we'll let you speak and then we'll go to questions, and if you have to leave, you can take off.
Sure, great, okay. Yeah, speaker ready for Jimmy. I gotta tell you, Jay did a great job, and my first week, that's what we got to get hit with. And thank God, you know, I'm kind of a veteran of all this anyway, but it was a very interesting situation. And the first thing they told us was, well, there's going to be an amendment on the floor to oust this person. That's only happened once, and that was in the Civil War. Right. So I thank Jay for helping us, you know, make history. We fell short about 11 votes of ousting this guy. We needed a 2/3 majority. So I'll let you come to your own conclusions about why that didn't happen. But he did get censured, and unfortunately, he's still there. Having said that, I'm Randy Railsback. I took Doc Neely's spot. Doc was turned out, District 8. That's primarily Caldwell and Clinton County, a little bit of Ray, a little bit of Clay. And so Doc did a great job, and he could only serve 4 two-year terms. So in his 3rd term, he was like, you better get ready to go, because, you know, he was, and I said, you serve your last term, and then we'll see. Well, I've been the director of 2 regional planning commissions for 30 years. I've been 18 years as director of Green Hills, and I had 11 counties. We're the ones that get all the water towers, sewer systems built, things like that. And for 12 years before that, I was director of Northwest up in Maryville. I had 5 counties up there. And so I ran, we had 3 opponents, and you know, I just want to tell you a little bit more about myself and how it relates to teaching. But I had never run for office as an RPC director. You're prohibited from being involved in partisan politics anyway, because I work with whoever's elected. So it was my wife and I would rather never have to do that again. We running a campaign against 3 other people, but we did, and it came out quite well and such. And we had a primary election, and then there was no one on the Democrat side that filed for the general. So August the 4th, it was over and done with for us, which also happened to be my birthday, so that was a good deal. My family, we live on a century farm north of Hamilton, and my great-grandfather settled there in 1872, and we've been there ever since. My dad was born in 1918, and he's gone now, but he had 3 older sisters, and those 3 older sisters, my grandfather sent all 3 of them to college, and they all became teachers. 2 of them right over here at Kidder Tech, you know, Shaw Memorial. That's on my dad's side. On my mom's side, her father, my grandfather, that was the only grandparent I had alive when I was born, and he died when I was 5, but he was a teacher in the 30s, and he made $30 a month as a teacher in a 1-room schoolhouse. Currently, my oldest son, Craig, is a teacher coach right over here at Osborne and Sturtsville. He was about 10 years in Bramer and then lived over there. And then my second son, William, is a paramedic in Caldwell County. He's the director of Caldwell County Ambulance, and he's the vice chair of the school board in Hamilton. Now we have our oddball daughter, Taylor.
So all we really have to do is say, hey, we want you to vote on this, and you'll do it.
That's it. That's my message right there. Our daughter is the youngest, and she's a prosecuting attorney in Chicago for the state's attorney's office. And so we've got teachers, paramedics, we got lawyers, we got it covered. And so the answer is yes. You tell me what to do and how to vote, and that's what I'll do. So during the campaign, and since I hear from my school districts all the time, and I know Jake does too, and such, and I am a believer in public education. I am a freshman. We're all called either freshmen, sophomores, juniors, or seniors, and such. And we have got a good group of reps here in North Missouri. You know, Jay's done a great job. He's the old senior now as in his 7th year, but we've got a good mixture. And across the board, we all support public education. In the urban areas and in the cities and such, it gets really complicated. And there's a lot of challenges with charter schools and open enrollment and all kinds of things that make sense in some places and not so much in others. All I care about is here and how we protect our school districts and the kids going here. And when you hear some of the stories about some of the other areas, we are very fortunate to be living where we do live and have the school districts and the teachers that we have. So having said all that, I get a lot of feedback. I also haven't even mentioned I've got some sister-in-laws that are teachers. I mean, I can't swim a good cat without having a teacher in my family. So it's all good. Well, I got down there right off the bat. We did that. The day we were sworn in was January the 6th. January the 6th, we were sworn in. We had about 300 demonstrators outside the Capitol. We went to the floor. We all got sworn in. And then we spent about 2 hours electing our Speaker of the House and those leadership positions. And then I came back up to my office where my family was waiting, and everybody's looking at the TV because they're storming the Capitol in Washington, D.C. And we're like, so what's everybody outside this Capitol doing? And we looked out the windows, and they weren't, they got storming the Capitol, but it, you know, it's kind of like, well, this is an interesting day, isn't it? And then we turn right around and get to do that and such. And so we got off to an interesting start. Turned out, I think a week later, we were told they're gonna start handing out committee assignments. You don't know, you know, where you're gonna be appointed. You give them an idea of kind of what you'd like. Right now, thank God Jay and I neither one on budget. But most of my colleagues, especially as freshmen, it's kind of like Christmas, you know, you come out and you're like, okay, what did you get? You know, well, I got, you know, da-da-da-da-da, and everybody's like, 2 committees, a couple of them had 3, and I'm like, I got 5. I went over 5 committees, and I guess with my experience going down there, you know, they thought I could handle that, I guess. So I'm on consent and house procedures, I'm on financial institutions, I'm on local government, downsizing state government, and then another one, I can't even think what it is now. Yesterday morning I had 3 hearings to testify at the same time on 2 of my bills were being presented. And so you see legislators down there in the basement where all the hearing rooms are going like, you know, like this and such. But it all works out, then we go to the floor, and then we wonder, how long are we gonna be here? Could be 2 hours, could be 6 hours. Maybe it's an interesting, and then you think, I haven't had anything to eat today. Maybe I have to get something to eat somewhere. And many times I've started at 7 in the morning and then get back to my hotel room and call my wife, and it's 8 o'clock, and I said, well, I've had a half a granola bar. I probably ought to find something to eat. You'd be amazed what it's like. And so it's a great atmosphere. It's a great place to be, but people say, well, how do you like that? And I said, well, I'm strangely comfortable with it because of my experience. Well, I've been to Jefferson City once or twice a month for 30 years. When you're on the other side of the table and you're sitting on the floor and you're actually supposed to be there, and you've even got your own desk, it's quite an honor and it's an awesome responsibility. And then as you get into the process more and you realize that the biggest chunk of people around you are there because they want to do good. That's really what they want to do. They have their own beliefs, but they want to do the right thing. And then there's a few of them around you that you realize that don't have the faintest idea where they're at and what they're actually doing. So you try and help them as much as you can. But I really appreciate the leadership that Jay has given. He's on this rules committee. I don't know how he does it. Everything is, it's just an amazing, how many, 1,600 and how many bills? I mean,
1,500, some have been filed. 200 come through, roughly 200 come to my committee to be evaluated, and I think we've passed out 100 or so of those.
You've always heard the process of making of a law become, or a bill becoming a law. It's a little bit like watching sausage being made. It's not a pretty process to watch. That is an understatement. And how things get amended and stuff like that. It's amazing, but thank goodness we've got great leadership up here in North Missouri. We've got some really good reps that are working hard and trying to do the right thing. And so having said all that, I'm the freshman. I can tell you about myself, and that's about it. Jay's expert on all these bills that we've been running through, but we just had our spring break a week ago, so we're halfway through. If you didn't know, the legislature was in session from January through May, and then we're on basically recess until we have a veto session in September. The governor can call special sessions anytime he wants. Had 3 or 4 last year, I think, with the COVID mess and stuff like that. So even though we're not in session, we're still reps. We're still attending meetings. We're still responsible. We have legislative assistants helping us every day with contacts and such. And I'll close with this example that I left the Capitol yesterday afternoon. Takes about 3 hours to drive home for me. And then as soon as I got home, one of my legislative assistants calling me, and it's like, well, the budget committee has, done some things with the Medicaid expansion, and we don't know what's going on, but we're getting calls all over the place. Jay and I are not responsible for that. We didn't do it. And we're not even sure exactly what happened yesterday afternoon, but it'll get worked out. And we do have a system of government where the House does one thing, the Senate does something else. They come together, and then the governor either approves it or vetoes it. And in the case of the budgets are, the votes on budgets will be that tall. And something will get worked out. We're going to be responsible, to the people of Missouri. But it's a complex situation. And as of right now, I'm still not exactly sure what happened yesterday afternoon, but we've got to perfect all these budget bills next week so they can go to the Senate. So before you chew us up and spit us out, I plead, I don't know. And we'll see what happens and such. But I can tell you that there's a lot of good people down there, and we're trying to do the right thing no matter what. But education, we're for you. Like I said, my grandfather taught for $30 a month. I think your pay's done a little bit more than that now, but still it's not on pace where it should be and such. But we appreciate everything you guys do. So I'm over open.
Just
before this question, I do want to say I have been to a number of these meetings, as you remember, over the years. But usually I'm the only one. So I'm happy to have Randy participating with it, and I look forward to partnering with him on all the things that really affect Cameron in our area.
Yeah,
as we go forward.
Yeah, our line is.
It's 8th Street. Yeah,
it's
right here.
Yeah, first side, right, yeah. So walking across the
okay. Just yesterday, I was reading something, and I hope it's not true, but is there legislation being favored to legalize recreational marijuana? Now, that's not education, but is that something that is?
So that is one of the 1,500 and some odd bills that have been filed,
right? And
one of the 1,300 and some odd bills that have gone over.
Okay. Because what I read yesterday was it was heating up and looked favorable for passage to legalize recreational marijuana.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, good. So if it did, where would you two stand?
Well, I want to echo what Jay was saying, the initiative petition process. I've used that as an example. It's like, you remember we had 3 different marijuana bills on the ballot?
Yes. 3 for my initiative petition.
That's because of the way that our current initiative petition process works, and everybody's like, why do we have 3 of these? Well, it's because outside influences got enough votes and they got it on there. Okay, having said that, I've been asked, I am not for legalizing recreational marijuana, and I don't see that becoming, but for a while yet, but it eventually will.
Now, that was filed on our side by a St. Louis County rep. The mindset of folks in St. Louis County, a little different than the mindset of folks from in Northwest Missouri. Okay. But I'll have to double check. I don't think that's even been referred to committee by the speaker to be taken up. I don't think it's going anywhere. Okay. If it did go, I would do something for it.
We probably should also mention that if you look, which you can, you can watch this on the floor. We have live feed now in the hearings and on the floor. Correct. But we have how many Republicans?
114 of 100. 163 members of the House, 114 are Republican, and 40% are.
Well, we keep the Democrats over here, and we're over here. And a lot of times we work well together. Sometimes not so much, but we are in the super majority, and so that I don't anticipate that becoming even close to reality for some time. I can understand the benefits of some of the medicinal issues and such like that. I don't understand it very well, but I'm recreational.
I'm a little concerned about the House Bill 369 in that $50 million comes from the state budget, right?
It would be money that doesn't end up in general revenue. It wasn't like it got in general revenue and they took it out, but it kind of is because it doesn't end up there, because people get to write that off of their taxes and not pay their taxes, correct?
Okay, so that's $50 million, a lot of money, and in my simple brain, and acting as a former superintendent, that could be channeled to school district, right? Not part of it? And so now it won't be.
So the funding formula really dictates how much money from GR ends up going to school. For the last several years, we have fully funded the formula. So whatever happens to other issues, that isn't affecting schools. So that was a key thing that I'm looking for as I read these bills. Is this going to affect the funding formula? Because that's definitely going to affect the rural schools that I deal with. Is it going to affect the whole harmless provisions and things like that? That particular thing is a tax credit. Some folks are against that because it does reduce GR. We had tax credits for General Motors here a couple of years ago. General Motors from out of Wentzville, which is a suburb of St. Louis, came to the governor and came to the legislature and said, you might just pack up and leave unless you give us $50 million in tax credits so we can revamp this plan. Now, there was some debate whether that's right or not. Is that fair treatment? Is little businesses on 3rd Street going to get the same kind of deal? Or because GM is so big, they get to kind of, blackmail us that way? So there's a tax credit. We had a tax credit the other day for processing beef. We pretty good cow-calf and raising calves, but then they tend to go to Kansas and actually get processed. Why not do that here? Well, you have to incentivize that with a tax credit to make those folks want to build those businesses here. So there's a variety of tax credits that you have to weigh pros and cons whether they're good or not. But as long as in the end we keep fully funding the formula, those shouldn't have a detrimental effect on schools. That's a concern.
It's important to know in Missouri we use tax credits a lot. I wasn't for that, but we do use tax credits a lot because we can't just say, here's some money. There's a way of a roundabout helping to incentivize such. But one of the compromises on that one was that it can't go into effect unless the transportation funding for schools is at a higher rate than what was originally proposed. But that's why I say about these education bills. They're very complicated and it's hard to do a one-size-fits-all, and we're completely different in St. Louis, like Jay said, and even Kansas City.
Jay had a question.
I'm not in either one of your districts. But what I wondered, you keep talking about fully funding the foundation formula, but isn't it very low compared to how much increase there has been as far as cost is concerned? I understand it's at the 2005 level as far as foundation formula compared to cost.
I'm not aware of that, and that certainly isn't something that I've heard discussed at the Capitol. The formula is a bit complicated, but it has to do with figuring out, well, how much does it cost to properly educate a kid? And that's based on test scores from schools that are doing what Desi thinks is a good job. And then you take that number times the number of kids, and that gets you the amount of money you're supposed to have a fully funded formula. Now, that formula was put in place, I'm going to guess here, around 20 years ago, I'm going to say, something like that, in that ballpark, and was never fully funded until my second year, third year. So for the last 3 or 4 years, the legislature, the leadership has said, this is a priority. We will fully fund. We have heard from school groups and teachers that, well, you make this formula, but then you never fully fund it. We want to have that off the table from now. We will make it a priority to fully fund that number. And for the last several years, they have. The budget is in the works this year. The commitments that I've heard from leadership and from the folks who lead the budget is they want to fully fund it again this year and for all the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My question is sort of kind of a steady percent given to education statewide. It was kind of going down compared to way back, you know, when I first started. I just wondered, do you know what percent now of the total state budget goes to education? Because it was deteriorating a little every year.
So not being on budget, I don't have that percent off the top of my head. But my understanding is a lot of if there's a percentage different change, it isn't because less money is going into education. It is more money is going into other things. And the big elephant other thing really has been Medicaid. Healthcare costs, the bill companies, the hospitals and all, they want more and more. And the way that Medicaid and health insurance and all of that market works, those costs have risen so much. I think our percentage, do you remember the number? We talked about that in caucus a little bit. But I mean, it's a very significant amount that goes to Medicaid. Well, as it grows and it gets a bigger percent, other parts get a smaller percent, but that doesn't mean they're getting less money necessarily. They may be getting more money, just not growing as fast as Medicaid or some of these other things are.
But you're right, in the pie of the total state budget, there's a big chunk that is locked in and is not even available for debate. It's not going anywhere. It has to be paid. But where's the first place? You heard it, you know, if revenues are down, you know, every year the state of Missouri has to rely on the budget forecast for the coming year and what kind of growth they're looking at. And if there's a shortfall, education is always one of the first places that they look if they have to cut. That's not fair, but that's what happens. But there's a chunk of the budget that there's no wiggle room on and such. But we can look that up for you. But I hate to even guess now. I remember when we were freshmen orientation, we had a pie chart. We were seeing all the different chunks of the budget. But that is unfortunately a place, and higher ed especially. Now I'm not going to say that some of that might not be justified, but higher ed does get.
Well, you know, in these little schools in your area, the little towns, the school is the hub of the whole community.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and that's why it's so important.
Yeah, you said on House Bill 369 that if the threshold for the transportation formula is not met, no new applications can be approved.
Correct.
But are those that were previously approved, they continue to be funded?
Yeah, because those kids have now made a decision and gone a direction, and so they didn't want to then upset their life by saying, well, you know, this path that you were on, now we're going to pull you out and make you go somewhere else. So they didn't want to do that. But they, at the same time, they understood that they didn't want the transportation thing to be a one-time trigger, and then transportation goes right back down the next year. That's going to be a threshold that has to be met every year that they might want to have new kids have the chance to get these scholarships. So
I understand the logic behind that, but I also see the general, you said that doesn't come from general revenue, but the loss of revenue that goes into voucher, or education savings, is a voucher. And so I see that as a deterrent to public schools. I'm president of the Cameron School Board, and I see that as loss of revenue for my school district.
If that ended up translating to, well, we don't have enough money to fully fund the formula this year because of these credits, you'd be absolutely right. Could the budget committee folks have assured us that's not going to be the case? Now, maybe Department of Ag or Department of Corrections or Department of something else may have to take a haircut because of this or not get as much funding. Or maybe there's growth in other places that would make up for that. But to get 369 across the line, they're going to have to assure voters in districts like us that that our rural schools aren't going to be taking a hit of some sort to try to help all these urban schools with their particular problems. And they do have, there was a sheet that my seatmate had that showed the percent of kids who graduate from school who, once they're out, they have their diploma, you know, you did it, you're successful, you're ready to go in the future. Well, how many of them need remedial classes before they can ever take their first college course? In our area, it was 10, 12%. That's kind of concerning, but then we thumb through the pages and get to those St. Louis schools, it's like 50, 60. There was one that was 75% of the students that they're just running through the process and handing a diploma to really aren't prepared. That can be now, and then what happens to that kid? Well, then they can get a job, so then they turn maybe to crime. You've seen some of this nonsense going on in Kansas City, you know, working at the lab to St. Joe, that is got to have an effect on us in the long term. So I understand that they want to help that situation. I think they should try to help that situation in the big cities. But they got to do it in a way that doesn't have, you know, they're not taking from us to help them. And so they've crafted 369, I think, to have some of those protections in there. Now, again, the Senate, it's had its, I think 369 has had its first hearing in a Senate committee, but that committee then will have to meet again. They'll have an opportunity to amend it further. They might amend it on the Senate floor. If they make those amendments, it's going to have to come back to us. We'll have a reevaluation on the House side. So it's partway through the journey. But early on, they're looking at a lot of protections to make sure we're not hurt, just to try to help make sense. And that's always my focus.
I know that Randy has another commitment. I don't want to hold you up. So.
I'm good for a little bit.
Okay.
I've got a lady retiring at the courthouse over there, so.
Are there any other questions for Randy or Jay?
I was just wondering on that 2.5 cent road tax.
Gas tax?
Yes, I've been asking that question to Jay, Randy, for as long as he's been in. I think is, you know, how can we get some more money for roads? What do you think the chances of that getting through?
At this point, I don't know that I can put a percent on it because it hasn't gotten far enough through the process yet. It's gotten through the Senate, but it has to go, I assume it would get referred to the Transportation Committee. They'll have to work on it. I think it would have stood a better chance if it was a vote of the people than just we're just going to impose this sort of thing. I think there may be members on our side that are reluctant to do that, especially after all the prior votes have been rejected by citizens. But then again, you know, maybe this with the rebate mechanism of turning in all your receipts and all, maybe that kind of makes that a wash and it'll get loved. I'm not really sure. The push-pull is, on one hand, it's a tax increase and people don't like that. On the other hand, you know, when you have more money for roads and bridges, when your roads and bridges get better, if we did do this, so there's kind of a torn aspect to it. So I would love to know what you guys think. Would you want to have your gas taxes raised by the 12.5 cents? Do you trust MoDOT enough that think that's worth it, that they would do the right thing? Or would they take that money and just help St. Louis and Kansas City and widen I-70 and we wouldn't see our letter routes get better? I mean, what is your general
I spent
feeling?
$1,800 getting my car lined last year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of other work. And I asked him about it. They said, oh, it's just potholes, probably because of this. I had a ram bin on my car.
Probably drive
so
all
I would certainly be in favor.
I'm one of those old farts that would keep my receipts and get my.
Well, there's some history here that everybody needs to remember, and that is Missouri has one of the largest network of roads in the country, and we have about the lowest gas tax.
Yeah.
But we've had 2 ballot initiatives in the last 10 years, and one of them was to do a half-cent sales tax to fund transportation. And the thinking then was there are a lot of members of Missouri society that use highways and bridges, but never buy any gasoline. You know, they're public transportation, others, even Amish, they never buy any gasoline, so they're not actually contributing to the pot. That didn't make it, and then most recently we had a bill that the last day of the session, the Senate wrote up that said we'll fund the Missouri Highway Patrol with this gas tax increase. Now the reasoning with that was that $350 million comes out of the MoDOT pot right off the bat to fund the highway patrol. If that had passed, it would have funded the highway patrol and left the $350 million in the pot for roads and bridges. But a lot of people got confused about what that meant, and then when they attached it to a Special Olympics bill, that really made good sense. So nobody knew what, and it almost made it, but today, you know, the bottom line is, I've been working with MoDOT for 30 years. You know, they've leaned up, they've done a lot of good things, there's always room for efficiencies, but there's no way around the fact that the worse the roads and bridges get, the more it's gonna cost to bring them back up. And in our world, letter routes are everything to us out here. You know, we see what we have to spend on interstates, and it comes out of the pot, and such. But I live on a lettered route, you know, we've got lettered routes all over the place, and that was a result of a program years ago called Get Missouri Out of the Mud. And that was to get roads in condition that even grain could get to market, and it was called Get Missouri Out of the Mud. So we have a lot of minor routes, and no, we're not gonna give them back to the county and turn them into gravel and such. But if we don't fund them, they're only gonna get worse.
And it's a prioritization thing too. I think I've only gotten complaints about road conditions on Highway 33 from Osborne Junction to Maysville. That's the only number route I've ever gotten a complaint on. All the complaints I get are about lettered routes. That they get their potholed, they're warpy. My in-laws that lived up in Gentry County, you've driven on, what is it, Double E. I mean, they had car damage from, you know, so they would just avoid it and drive gravel roads over to a different, or we're doing a different road to avoid driving on the very road that they lived on. I've talked to MoDOT, the director, I know Senator Hagman has too, about why don't you, and I know what they do, they factor in the number of traffic, the amount of traffic on a particular road as to how much funding it gets, and because the lettered routes get so little traffic, then they don't fund them. They do little pothole patching, but a complete nice repave, just, you know, they just don't do that. And I implored, well, you need to factor in some amount of customer complaint as well as miles driven in your formula. So some of these letter routes get a little bit more love, but that's not been the emphasis.
Old 36, I think, is in your district.
Yes.
I want to complain about that.
Yeah.
I think on this tax thing, I'm hearing that, now this is the different things I shouldn't, but that gas is going to go up at least double, probably, from where it is now. And so putting in 12 more cents on, I think it's going to be, I mean, I understand how it goes, and I would save my receipts too, but I think it's going to be hard to sell when gas is going to get really high. I don't know.
I have no idea what will happen with gas prices. I know in this day and age, if it changed to nickel tomorrow, we wouldn't even blink. We wouldn't even think about, you know, gas doesn't go up a penny at a time anymore. It jumps around all over the place. But you want me to talk about all 36?
Please do.
And then I'll leave?
Yes. If I drive that way, I'd have to go like this on.
Oh, I
live on it.
Yeah, I'm the history guy, and I have to tell you, like, well, here's the situation. And when New 36 was built in the early 60s and finished, Old 36 no longer became the responsibility of the state of Missouri to maintain. And there was a lawsuit that wound up in the Supreme Court that said that highways can be abandoned and they're not required to be maintained forever because there was an impossible definition of what forever meant. I remember that long ago. So having said that, I've had people talk to me about Old 36. I'm like, well, first off, don't blame your township, don't blame the state, because it's your road. They don't have any responsibility for it, and haven't for 50 years. So it's amazing that Old 36 has even held up as long as it has. Because if you go to Hamilton, it goes all the way over to Meadville, and there's some places that's just about gravel, but it's still there, and it still gets used. I suggested, you know, first off, it's not the responsibility of the state and hasn't been for a long time. What you could do is you can put yourself in as a transportation development district, and everybody that owns land and residents all up and down Old 36, you can vote yourself in as a transportation development district, and you can maintain it yourself with a property tax, and it'll increase your property values, and you'll have a better road. But it's your road. It is your road. So they can go back in the sixties, and I've actually asked research to do that. It is in the sixties that the Supreme Court ruled that they don't have any further responsibility. So that's why it doesn't get any attention.
I mean, it's been several years, but there was a little girl who was killed because of how the road was.
Oh, yeah,
It was awful.
I had a guy tell me, he said, well, I understand that Old 36 doesn't have any funding because it doesn't have a gas station on it. No, it has nothing to do with it either. It has not been the responsibility of the state. And like I said, that was in the 60s, and that's when U-36 was finished, Old 36. And we have other situations across the state where the same thing has happened. There is a solution, but it would mean, just like you pay taxes, your gas tax to maintain this road, it would be a way of maintaining 36 if you create your own district all up and down the highway there, and it'd be yours. Yeah, you make a toll road. That'd be about as popular as the play. Yeah, good luck with that one. But I'm glad to help with that, because I'm telling you, same thing helps.
Yeah, I live on Salem, so I'm not on it, but our gravel road is better than Old 36. It's really sad.
I used to haul grain up and down from Breckenridge to Hamilton, up and down that road. Again, I don't know how it survived as long as it has, but it's rough. But there is, and I told Breckenridge about it, so there's a solution to this. You'd have to get involved and create this, but right now, people drive to Breckenridge, they don't need a car license. They don't need a driver's license. It's not even patrolled. And consequently, you can rent a house over there for $25 a month and just have great time. It's not the responsibility of the state any longer, and it has been for a long time, but it could be far better rather than it is.
I have a question. Why do we have, it says, like at Savannah, it's $2.69 and 9 cents. Why do they have that 9 cents on there? Why don't they just make it the next penny and get rid of that? Because it really is.
Because it's always been that way.
That's crazy.
Probably back when gas was 10 cents a gallon. Then, man, making it 11 cents, I don't know if they'll buy it, but at 10.9 they won't notice.
It's a marketing strategy.
I can tell you, I don't know what that answer is, but as I ease my way out towards the door, I'll tell you the last story of the day, and that is one of the retailers that was famous for not saying that pair of coveralls cost $10. It was $9.99, and that was J.C.Penney that did that. And so I don't know if that's a gas tax answer or not, but I think it's out.
You have to say,
That's why
you have to say it's only 9. Yeah, that's what.
It's not $10, it's $9.
Only
Yeah.
$9.99.
I know, it's under $10.
Thanks for having me. I'm gonna go on.
Thank you.
I think Dr. Macker had a question.
There are a lot of, topics rolling through that are of concern, or are concerning for school districts, open enrollment vouchers, MOCAP enrollment. But there's one that, I'm not sure if it's actually came about, but House Bill 494, the Michigan Home School Student Participation Bill. Do you have any take on that, or the bill specifies that a school district should not receive funding under the foundation formula if we're a member of NISHA or prohibit homeschool students from participating within athletic activities. And that's not a priority academically, but I just wondered if you have a take on that, or
Yeah, I'm not
do you have anything to offer?
I don't know that I do. Let me look up where 494 sits at the moment, because I don't recall that. It may be one of those many bills that aren't going. Let me see. This is Hulbert's. Prohibits public school membership and any statewide activity association that prohibits homeschool. I see. Okay, so schools need to let homeschool kids participate in sports is where he's going with that. And that one did get referred to the Education Committee, was voted out 13-7. It is now sitting in the other rules committee, none of these come to mind. And got plopped there on the 10th, so it's been sitting there a couple of weeks and not gotten a hearing yet. I have not talked to that sponsor about that bill, and I have not talked to the other rules chair to know whether he's gonna move it forward or not.
Okay, we've got a few questions just regarding one of them, so.
Yeah. Sure. Anything else?
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
I appreciate everybody's support
for us and so.
You bet, you bet. And if you ever think of any questions, anything that I can help you with as your kind of man on the inside, just email me, j.eggleston@house.mo.gov is the email, and I'll try to get back to you.
And he'll do it too.
Yeah, I always respond. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.